afternoon, friends. Salam and Zindabad. I'm sure you've enjoyed the line up for the last 2 days and are getting up for the finale. Before I start, a quick note on the language support. You would see that there is a sign language interpretation right on your screens. There are also two language interpretations in Hindi and Tamil. You can access this from the globe, which is right there at the bottom of your screen. I will wait for you to switch to the language of your preference. Last year around 8:30, whenever there was this sudden sort of announcement that somebody would come up on the screen, there was always this nervousness of what's next. The Big Boss tasks were, of course, always a surprise. One had to do it, and one was locked at home, like the Big Boss house. But of course, there was no prize money attached there. Being in home for most part without being able to express, experience, and share our desires and thoughts made our lives very difficult. But then we had our fiber lines to be our saviors. What started with playing Ludo has slowly given birth to places like Clubhouse. We are there talking to each other, sharing, providing support when needed, but digitally. Our lives are complicated. For those of us who could do these digital interactions, we were not spared by the challenges you see in physical spaces. There were scams, there were locker rooms, as well as there were community spaces for support and safe homes. Digital indeed became one of the tools for young people, but really slowly went beyond as spaces for young people that young people were occupying. So this session is about that. It is going to go deeper into the fault lines in this shift that we have seen. How and if there was any correlation with the mental health and well-being, especially of young people. And where do we really go next from here? And to discuss all of this, we have an amazing panel with us today. We have Anurag Minus Verma, who some of you might have heard the podcasts of. Anurag is actually a multimedia artist and hosts Anurag Minus Verma podcast on Spotify. He's pursued Masters in Arts and Aesthetics from the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. His bylines and opinion pieces, I'm sure you would have seen in the print, News Laundry, Wire, and Roundtable India, and many more. We also have today with us the 2017 Journalist of Change Award winner, Snigdha Poonam. Snigdha is a journalist and writer and has written many books, articles, essays, and much more. Her first book, Dreamers: How Young Indians Are Changing the World, won 2018 Crossword Book Award for non-fiction and was long-listed in 2019 for PEN American Literary Awards. It's my honor to invite you both to the panel. We also have, for the most crucial and the most central part of the panel, we have Soumitra Pathare, who is a psychiatrist by training and director of Center for Mental Health, Law and Policy. This exciting panel will be moderated by Supriya Nair, who's the co-founder of the media company All Things Small and editor of 52. And before I hand it over to Supriya, I would like once again to welcome all of you to contribute to making this space a space for rejuvenation, for reflection, and learning together. We've had many discussions with open hearts, full of compassion and respect for each other. Let us maintain that and ensure that any discussions that will engage with ideas and issues of gender, sexuality, desire, or even violence are done in an affirming manner. We would like all attendees to know that there is a resource list of helpline and referral services available on the conference website. If that is something that you need, please feel free to access those. As part of the conference team, we do not tolerate sexual harassment or sexist or casteist slurs or comments. Anyone who would violate this norm will unfortunately have to be removed of the conference. In case of any concerns around safety or complaints, you can definitely reach out to the Internal Complaints Committee Against Sexual Harassment or the Safeguarding Committee. All of that information is available on the chat below. And now, without further ado, I would really invite Supriya to take over the floor and make us go through this another pleasurable conversation.
Thank you so much, Prableen, and hello panelists, and hi everyone at the conference. I will try and speak as slowly as possible because this is the first time I've had the privilege of having our speech interpreted in sign language as well as in other languages. Please feel free to stop me, ask me to repeat something or go over something again. If at any point anyone who's listening feels that I or anyone else on the panel needs to do that. Thank you very much, Anurag, Snigdha, Soumitra. It's a pleasure to be in conversation with you. And I'm just going to dive right in, taking off from what Prabheen said and say, hello from my bedroom where I have been working for the last year and a half, as have all of you in various sort of closed spaces. How has the pandemic affected the work you do and the people you work with, particularly the young people you come in contact with over the course of your work? I'll go alphabetically. So Anurag, would you like to take this first?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? But just checking.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, work as in like I was working in a completely different sector. I'm not completely different, but I was working as an editor in Bombay. But after this pandemic, I had no job, so I started experimenting few things online. So that's how it started. Like I was initially creating some content, like some short documentaries and some mimicry videos, some satire, political satire, which I always wanted to do, but I didn't have the strength to do that, or I had too many self-doubt about myself, so I was a bit hesitant to do this in front of a big crowd which is there online. So that's how it started. So I think during this whole pandemic, there were like people on internet who are consuming the content have increased, and in this particular time there was also a lot of uncertainty and anxiety of the future, because we didn't know that we would survive tomorrow or not. So a very different kind of content came out. I'm particularly talking about the online content space. So a different kind of content came out of this particular mind state, which is operating in an atmosphere where there is lack of hope for the future. I think people became a little more expressive and less fake, because they were putting something online without any special future goal or strategy, and maybe because they realized that at that particular time we all were feeling that world is ending kind of situation. So a very different kind of art and humor was developing on internet at that time, and I think we need some research to understand that what was going in the mind of people who was producing the work in one of the most hopeless time of one of the most hopeless time of human existence. So what people were thinking, I think we need some research after a few years. Yeah, I mean, personally for me, it opened me up in a strange existential sort of way, where things were not making any sense, and whatever we were told about the world, that there is an order in it and it flows in a certain order, that whole thing was a lie. And at that time I realized that I can be free about who I am, and I can express things which I find interesting. So personally, this whole phase in a strange way made me more fearless to express myself, and I think it happened with many people.
Yeah, that's a really interesting paradox that I imagine we'll keep coming back to, about having less hope, but in some ways also finding that freeing, at least in terms of how you saw yourself and how you expressed yourself. Snigdha, how did this work out for you, with the people you interview, with the people you come in contact with as a journalist?
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, and see you clearly, which is such a delight.
Thank you. So before the pandemic, my work as a journalist was very much rooted in the ground. So I would go wherever the story was, anywhere in the country. And then when the first lockdown hit, it became clear to me that, most of my reporting will have to be on the mobile phone and around the mobile phone. And the way it turned out is that, I mean, to me, the most important stories were playing out on the mobile phone. I'll talk about one or two. So this was like very much in the first wave when we were still in the first 3-week, 4-week lockdown. And it had become clear to us that this pandemic's effects, especially economic, because at that time it only seemed economic, were wide sweeping and damaging. And I'm talking especially about the time when we were seeing this like mass exodus of migrants back to their villages and towns. And I started to look at the stories of people who were left completely without an option, people who were made completely down and out by the lockdown or the pandemic, if you would like to call it that. And these were people who had lost their jobs. This was still the first wave, but people were falling sick. I mean, if not of COVID, then something else goes on in the family. So people were falling sick, or someone else in the family rents had to be paid, EMIs had to be paid, and you have nothing. It's not about, no matter how hard times get for us, we always have 10,000 in the bank. These are people who didn't have 100 rupees left in the bank. So what do? So I was talking to them, and then one of them tipped me off about these apps that had started to really sort of explode on the mobile stores. And what was happening largely, and I reported a few stories around this, is that an economy sprang up around the mobile phone and on mobile stores. And the download links would be on WhatsApp or Telegram or YouTube, and these were all like apps and services that were selling to them, say, an instant loan or an instant job, an investment scheme that will make 10,000 into 20,000 in a day. And unfortunately, I went into each of these tangents to see what was going on. And unfortunately, a lot of these were just scammy operations trying to extract from these people whatever they had left or whatever they could borrow. And the worst part was, because I know you wanted to talk about privacy and identity and the internet. The worst part was that, of course, it was really devastating in terms of, taking a loan from someone and then getting, you're promised 5,000 with just you register your mobile phone, you get 5,000, but then the things that followed were quite brutal. I mean, if you couldn't pay it in the next week, the apps had gained access illegitimately to your entire contact list, to your private photos, to your SMSs. So, I mean, on each of these fronts, this was complete tragedy. People's entire contact lists were phoned and sent WhatsApp threats about, someone has not paid their loans, their bosses, their mothers-in-law, and their people they were going to get married to. Their photos were all over the place in terms of like blackmail. They were, it was just a very, very difficult, tragic story to report. But it's in this economy, if there were victims, there were also the scammers. And as my next book is about the rise of everyday scams in India. And so you also had thousands of people who suddenly either had a job or had a prospect. And I've been reporting the book partly either physically or through a phone or video from some of India's like poorest districts, villages, where you have entire villagefuls of people whose only job is to run these mobile phone scams that I'm sure each one of you has been subjected to in some way or the other. You will get calls saying, "Aapka KYC nahi hua hai," you've got a KBC lottery, or you're getting a cashback or something. And these are people for whom pandemic was not so bad in terms of like economic prospects. They suddenly have so much money. They built houses. So there are villages in which just through the last 2 years, they've they've made enough money together. Like the whole village's economy rose so much that they were able to build hospitals and schools in places where these things didn't exist earlier. But at the same time, I mean, was it a happy story? No. I mean, these are people whose lives are not easy either. They scam over the day, and then they have to like just run from the police all night, like hiding in villages. And I'll keep this short, but they can't sleep at night. That's something that a lot of them told me. There are people who have died of snake bites because they have to sleep in the villages because if they stay at home, they'll be picked up in a raid. And I've been reporting on this theme for a long time, which is how do people rise out of their circumstances in a country which is essentially poor and crushingly unequal. And I've heard a lot of sad stories, but the kind of trauma that I've seen during the pandemic, I was talking earlier about the people who have been victims of these scam apps and job apps, loan apps and job apps and investment apps. And so many of them in their first interviews with me said that I'm going to take my life. And I couldn't even put that in so many stories because editors would say that this was triggering. But this was the story. If so many people are telling me that, then this is something that is real. I think that the first few stories that I reported in the pandemic were like, they left me quite sad.
The sort of crushing economic distress that we see around us, and the loss of optimism that I think the pandemic really kind of turbocharged socioeconomically for all of us. I think that's really deeply connected to mental health, and that is in fact one of the core subjects of what Soumitra studies, what he has talked about and written about. So I think this is a nice segue into Soumitra, your observations, and I suppose your own experiences working through the pandemic, particularly with young people, young Indians.
Let me first put a couple of caveats, okay? One is that I come from a position of privilege in many sorts of ways, lots of privilege, financial, all sorts of privilege. So a lot of things that I might end up saying are from that privileged position. The second thing is that I was young a very, very long time ago. So everything that I might say may not necessarily resonate for many young people out here. I realize these days when I have some of my kids' friends who kind of refer to me as uncle, and I have to say, uncle kisko bola re? Kind of thing, realize that yes, I'm on the wrong side of 50. So those are caveats you need to keep in mind to anything that I say. To be honest, to work, I've not left home at all in the last 18 months. I have worked out of this room that you see behind me. Probably made 3 trips out of home, and as you can see, I'm privileged enough to be able to stay put in the house and not have to leave home. This has become a place to work, and my life before this used to be at least 15 days on the road, traveling to various places, early morning flights, late night returns, that kind of stuff, and I've not done any of that now. And paradoxically, to be honest, I've got addicted to this life. Okay, I mean, and that's when I said that how privilege plays out. And I think what it actually one of the things that is highly noticeable during the privilege has been how the pandemic has impacted different people in completely different ways. So if you lived in a position of privilege, the pandemic has actually, in many ways, been pretty good for you. And you see that even economically, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. So in many ways, if you are well off, then the pandemic has actually helped you get better off. Whereas if you are not well off, then the pandemic might result in you getting worse off. So I think who you talk to makes a huge difference. Some people will not be impacted and others will be positively impacted, whereas the vast majority are very negatively impacted. The second thing is that how it impacts someone like me versus how it has impacted my 19-year-old who is stuck at home with us for the last 18 months. As he says, he has to spend time with old folks, which is quite difficult. I mean, I kind of feel a bit sympathy for him. You're going to be 19 only once in your life, and imagine you spend the best years of your life, in a sense. If you're anywhere between 18 to 24 in this country, those are probably the best years of your life. You explore friends, you explore new worlds, you get away from family, you establish your identity. And what you have now is you're stuck in the house with your own families, and you're not, these years are not going to come back. I mean, if you're going to spend 3 years in college, when you might make lifelong friendships, for example, 2 years of that are spent sitting at home doing some online boring lectures. How do you compensate for that, and to go through life and never actually having experienced campus life? I mean, ask yourself, we all would be very poorer for that, isn't it? And that, I think, is a real issue. So that's one level of challenge for everybody. The other level of challenge for young people, as I see it, is while we've all talked about this whole online explosion in the digital world, the reality is that two realities, really. One reality is that not everyone has access. Uh, Many people don't have access, okay, just don't have access. Getting a smartphone is not that easy, and many families may have one smartphone, but that doesn't necessarily mean the youngsters in the household will get hold of that smartphone. Secondly, even if data is cheap, the definition of cheap is all very relative. For somebody to pay 200 or 300 rupees a month for getting data is not cheap. It all depends on your income and whether 200 rupees is cheap or not. And the third thing is that it's all very well to say that we will do things online, but that requires a certain amount of privacy. How do you have privacy if you are stuck in a place where there are two or three people in a small room? I mean, how do you get privacy to have an online conversation, for example? So all of these things have really negatively impacted a lot of people, especially young people who are missing out on education. And I think, education is not just about learning anything. I mean, if you, for all practical purposes, all of you know, and I know that you really learned very little at Indian universities. What you really learned was life when you went to university. You didn't really learn anything. So in that sense, I don't think they're missing anything out in terms of education. I'm sure at the end of the day, the only thing that you did in university was read up your books before your exam. But what you really learned was how to live, how to socialize, how to make friends, how to have heartbreaks, how to get into trouble, go on a morcha, have a fight, all of that stuff. Now, these are things you just miss out on pandemics. And that is really changing the way how young people are perceiving their own worlds. And the net result of all of this, I think, is that, and this is there's a little bit of data coming from many countries, if not from our country, that it has negatively impacted young people's mental health. I think it also what the pandemic and the sense that the ephemerality of life, everyone realizing that here today, gone tomorrow, kind of a thing, that it changes your perspective on things in life. It changes, young people don't go, if you remember when you were young, Supriya, you didn't think about death. You thought you were going to go on forever. A 19-year-old never thinks of anyone dying. It's like life just goes on forever. And I think that has hugely mentally impacted young people to be able to start thinking, to have to be forced to start thinking about mortality, about not only one's own mortality, but the mortality of close family members. And to kind of start seeing life as not that kind of expansive thing that you look at when you're 19, but to look at it in the way that 50-year-olds look at it, which is, you have a small, narrow vision there. So these are some of the things that I think you find when you talk to young people. I'll stop here and not just go on blabbering on for too long.
This was not blabbering at all. And I think the things you said implied something that I have been wondering about and thinking about, and I hope we can all talk about as we go on, which is that, I mean, we all know that the internet kind of replicates social structures from life outside the internet. So if there's inequality outside the internet is going to be unequal. But there's something about the pandemic that also seems to have magnified that. So, your life isn't just necessarily like replicating the stress of your offline life, but it's actively making it worse. I mean, suddenly, as Snigdha says, you have a phone that's practically been possessed by a demon, because these predatory apps, lending apps, have changed your life and have wrecked your life offline as much as they have online. Snigdha, that actually it's amazing, and maybe many of our audience members have remember this, but there was actually a time when you used to cover young people having fun on the internet. You used to talk about. I've read, you've written some great stories about how the internet changed dating for some people, or how it changed it for women. Dreamers, of course, your book was about the hustle. It was about hard work, and I feel like that divide has now become very stark. And do you feel like a lot of people are coming online, like to work and to hustle and not to have fun?
I know. I think the internet's still very entwined with hustle for, the young persons from disadvantaged or low-income backgrounds who are trying to make something of their lives in today's India, and it's hard. And but I think that the hustle has it's got harder, and I say this because I continue to see the lives of some of the people that I followed for Dreamers, and one of the things is that they got older. So I mean, there used to be this belief amongst the first, like India's, like I'll call it the first native, internet generation, that we have internet, we can do anything. But some years have passed, and even for some of them, like I followed, for example, there was an English, spoken English instructor in Dreamers. There was someone who was trying to become a film star in Bombay. And for them, and for a lot of other people I see, there is this realization that things may not be, I mean, internet may not be so as transformative as they might have thought. Like two of the people that I followed for the Dreamers were Muslim, and today they are very clear in whether they're talking to me or they're posting on Facebook, where I follow them much more closely, that their identity has come in the way of their attempts at upward mobility. So internet's not exclusive of what's happening in India today, and things are generally more polarized. Opportunities are so closely linked to your identity that it's tough. And so but I won't say that people are not having fun. I mean, as Anurag is much more much better poised to comment on, people are having loads and loads of fun. After Dreamers ended, the most exciting thing for me to report was those 2 or 3 years of like TikTok in India, and I must have reported it to death, literally, because it just went away. But I was writing a story a week or a month, following so many people across India doing so many kinds of things on it. It went away, and I haven't seen anything like that replace it. But people have found other ways. Like I'm really sucked into the India's like YouTube community right now. And I don't think that people will stop having fun.
Right.
But
and that maybe they won't stop. Yeah. And maybe the hustle won't stop being fun for some people if the right opportunity comes along. But as you say, that is shrinking. And over the last few years, I think, you and I came online at a time when the internet really felt like it was a way to leave your identity behind in some ways. And I think the last few years have shown us how difficult that really is. TikTok and that amazing moment that it represented in Indian popular culture, where like a whole band of Indians were entertaining people and gaining fame and success that had never happened in Indian pop culture before was really unique. And Anurag has written about this because he's also written about how the things that replaced it, for example, Instagram Reels culture, is just not the same. Anurag, I want to ask you sort of more specifically about the podcast, but I feel like maybe this is a good place for you to come in and comment on this.
No, I'll just take it forward from where Snigdha said that internet is fun or not. But if you talk to if जिससे भी मैं बात करता हूँ, they will say one thing that they want to get out of it, but they don't know how to get out of it. This is why when there was outage happened a few days back when Instagram was down, so many people subconsciously felt very good that they don't have to deal with it. So this is there that, see, you have to understand internet, I think 10 years ago or 12 years ago, notification were limited to email, or you might get email in, let's say, 3-4 days, and that it was limited to that. Or on Orkut, you might get some scrap sometime or some testimonial sometime. So this reward system was very less on internet. And whenever any notification occurs, any notification is a sign of hope. You think that something is about to happen. So you feel certain kind of thrill and pleasure, and it is also connecting you to outer world. So but now this notification and this small pleasure have increased to such a degree that there is non-stop flow of these small thrills. And when you don't get those thrills, then you are seeking for something that can give you some reward or that can give you some notification. So in an attention economy, everybody is trying to make themselves feel relevant, so that they too have something to say or something to present. Or people should listen to them as well. So this feedback of reward and all this notification is something which, this pleasure is so excessive that it has resulted into a fatigue of pleasure, and which in a way become anti-pleasure. So this is why many people don't want to get out of it, because they know that they are struggling with it. And even if you are putting something on internet, then there would be some counterpoint to that. Even if you say I like oranges, then people will find it offending. They will say something to that. And if somebody is dealing with certain mental phase, then they will take it very personally. So social media, expressing something on social media is not as fun as it might be, or I don't know it was fun or not, but anything which you express on social media and want to make your presence felt in crowded field has some kind of, it takes some kind of mental energy, and many a time it brings some kind of mental trauma. So that sharing is caring has now changed to sharing is caring. So that's what I think about it. And your second question, what was your second question, Supriya?
No, that was you addressed this really well. I specifically remembered that you had written about how TikTok became irreplaceable, at least or the difference between TikTok and Instagram Reels. Can I just, in a couple of sentences, introduce that to our audience? They may not have read your story. Which is, so Instagram Reels, which is the tab that basically replicates what TikTok does, right? That endless scroll. Anurag has written really clearly about how it feels the same as TikTok, but it's not the same as that at all. Go on, Anurag. Sorry.
Yeah, I wrote about the bias of the algorithm and what kind of influencers they create out of that. So if you look at TikTok, you will see a whole variety of people who are not economically very well, who come from certain caste, who come from certain class, and they are becoming influencer by posting and expressing themselves in a completely different manner, which many people who are privileged find cringe. So this is why you will see a lot of pages on internet by cringe of TikTok, cringe of Dombioli, cringe of this thing, that thing. So that there are a lot of bias in that. Like these people don't, the people who make the page and people who call themselves the taste maker or whatever, they think that whatever they are doing is cringe. But on TikTok app, they were free and they can express themselves and also find huge audience and follower for the same. But I think that Instagram and the Reel are extremely sanitized spaces, and where there is a certain bias of algorithm and certain bias of people who are controlling it, and this is the reason why the kind of influencers you see, or the kind of influencer even Instagram consider influencer, they will give blue tick to them, will be extremely different from the kind of influencer you'll see on TikTok. So Instagram, I was just pointing out at that biases of the Instagram, and even at the whole ecosystem, they will give the influencer of the year award, like Cosmo magazines and all these things. They will give influencer of the year award. You just have to check their class and cast, and you'll understand that what is going on there.
That really, I thought you expressed that really well in that editorial and now. So thank you for that. That actually seems like a good way to segue into something that a lot of our listeners must be thinking about, which is this big report that came out a couple of weeks ago in Wall Street Journal about Facebook knowing that Instagram was negatively impacting the mental health of young people and deciding not to do anything about it. Soumitra, is this something that you've either come across in your work, and would you like to comment on this at all?
Yeah, I was going to comment on this specifically because I got rid of my Facebook account about 4 or 5 years ago. I deleted it, and I refused to have Instagram. And I also deleted my WhatsApp 2 years ago and just told people, well, I'm sorry, I'm not there. You want to find me the old-fashioned way, call me up. There is no other way to do it. Because I think what the Wall Street published is something that anyone who's been following the story has known for the last 4 or 5 years. See, when we talk about the internet and talk about social media, that's a whole range of things, and all social media is not the same. And what people are really now focusing on are the triad which is run by Facebook, which is Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram. Paradoxically, what we found during the pandemic is, if there was before the pandemic, if there was at least an attempt to try and bring people together, like try and reduce disparities, not bring people together, but to try and reduce disparities. What we've seen during the pandemic happen is that actually the disparities have widened in all sorts of ways, okay, in terms of access, in terms of education, in terms of finances. So what we are increasingly seeing is a widening of disparities. And I mean, nobody's trying to blame Facebook or Instagram for that. But what certainly is very true is that Facebook and Instagram have contributed to widening those disparities, by playing into that. If there was a cleavage, then Facebook will put their finger into the cleavage and pull it apart, which I think is something that Facebook have done. There's also a lot of research now, academic research, which shows that Facebook and the posting on Facebook's having a negative impact on young people's mental health, especially. So clearly, so while social media is a good thing, and I'm not a Luddite and trying to say we don't need social media, but I think what is important for us to remember, though, is that social media, which is controlled by corporates for private profit, that's very different from saying that, oh, social media should be available. The whole promise of social media was the democratization of speech. Anyone could write anything and have a worldwide audience. Well, you realize very soon that that's not how it works at all, and that companies will prioritize. And as Anurag said, who's the influencer, whose posts will get put up, and what you get to see and what you don't get to see is actually then controlled by for-profit corporations who are doing it because it benefits them financially. Now, that is not at all the kind of internet or social media that we had all envisaged when we thought the social media was going to mean a lot of freedom. This is not freedom. This is manipulation, and you become. And the worst part about it is that we don't even know we are getting manipulated. You think you are in charge, but you don't know that you're being manipulated, and all of that has a huge negative impact on many young people's health, or mental health especially.
Yeah. I think your point about manipulation really opens up the fact that increasingly social media, as Anurag pointed out, that reward system, right, where like the notifications create the dopamine, has increasingly become about passive consumption for many people, and that's kind of how they get you, right? Um, Anurag, what is it like building a creative product of your own, building a community for it, and especially creating a space for speakers, listeners, ideas that come from Bahujan communities and from minoritized communities? Like, it feels like you're up against a lot. What has that been like specifically for you?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea behind it took the whole aesthetic and the theme of the podcast flew organically. Initially, what I thought was that I'll start a podcast which I would like to listen to, which is something which is relaxed, breezy, non-academic, where intellectual ideas are explored, but tone of that would be conversational and less interview kind of a thing. So where audience can feel like they are listening to where audience will feel that they aren't listening to something which is plastic or scripted, but a genuine conversation between two individuals where they can imagine themselves as a voyeur who got free pass to listen to this exclusive conversation happening between, or a private conversation happening between two individuals. So that was initial approach. And since I wanted to talk about something which I'm interested in, so I come from a Dalit background, scheduled caste background, so naturally I want to talk about caste and these issues, and especially in the जो ये issue थे mainstream के अंदर जो मैं इनको देख रहा था, there were I mean it was, there were people who were talking about the cast podcast pe to nahi tha, but on videos and all this stuff some people were talking about it, but that conversation was not real because those people were themselves coming from dominant caste or upper caste. So whatever they were speaking about, there is no lived experience of the skin on, like they say, skin in the game kind of a thing. So I wanted to create this also the second point is the whole idea developed from the a little annoyance of what was passed as intellectual conversation, or what was done by in the mainstream kind of thing, where people don't have much to say, but they speak a lot kind of thing. So I really want to bring Bahujan voices, bring Dalit voices whom we rarely listen. So that was the approach, like to build this alternative knowledge system. So so that was the whole idea behind it, because these conversations were not happening in the mainstream world, and but I didn't start it to challenge something or to bring down some structure or some grand thing, but I just wanted to have a conversation, and I am also surprised that so many people are listening to it here.
Yeah, you created a new space, and I think it's testament to the quality of the podcast. But I think what we've been saying about algorithms and just about the stress of being online in various ways makes it feel like maybe this was harder to do than you make it look. But if it wasn't, that's obviously really cool.
No, just one point I'll talk about
please.
this just briefly. I'll just complete it. The harder point, whenever a Dalit, especially someone who's coming from scheduled caste background, so when they talk about the caste, the hardest point is not algorithm as such or the social media as such, but is the fear of coming out. And then when you're posting something, or even if you're praising Ambedkar, if you are praising talking about the caste, then your colleagues and maybe your friends come to know that you come from that particular background. So this anxiety, which seems very I think upper caste won't understand it very well, because they can speak freely about any issue that they want to, but for us to even to speak about our own issue is an extremely challenging thing. This is the reason why not many friends who come from Dalit background don't talk about it, because they fear that they will somebody will get to know about their identity or get to know about them. So there is a social restriction that is being put when you're talking about caste. So my struggle wasn't the algorithm as such, but the struggle was that whole social idea attached to that, that I am talking about the caste freely now, and now everybody who was associated with me and everybody whom I know or who are my friends, they will come to know about me and how would they behave now. So that was bigger anxiety than the how algorithm behaves. Yeah.
Okay. I understand. I understand that. There's something that's been on my mind is that for many people it feels dangerous to be online, have a public online persona as who you are. If you're a woman, if you're a Muslim, as Snigdha touched on, if you're Dalit, Bahujan, and you're talking about things that matter to you, it feels like the internet can be a more dangerous and a more stressful place. But that's also how people seem to find community. Snigdha, what have you observed about how these things are negotiated, or are you finding that people are increasingly feeling that there are some people who, increasingly feeling like maybe it makes more sense to just like hide who I am or not?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I've been thinking about this. You said in your email that you wanted to talk about how internet was increasingly a dangerous place on which to express oneself. And my God, that has been more real than I could have imagined. We can speak about internet laws and regulations and how they go against, people who want to really express themselves or ask difficult questions. But I personally haven't met anyone who has come to trouble for posting something, either gone to jail or got a police call. But the stories that I've come across a lot are stories of people who have come to trouble locally from within their own communities, their own towns, for posting on Facebook. I had about a case in UP recently where someone was killed in his village for making a Facebook post. And those are not one-off stories. Those are stories of like casual violence based on someone's post in this polarized online atmosphere. It's become disturbingly common. For women, it's a whole different level of danger because they are increasingly concerned about how they are being watched, whether it's by the so-called love jihad mobs or by their own families, by the like random men in their mohalla who are watching who they're going out with. It's really tough. But I also like the other point of your your question, which is about internet is also the place where if women don't go, if Muslims don't go, if Dalits don't go, it will be harder for them to find communities. And I've seen this especially in the case of young women, that they've started to make these safe spaces within Facebook, which we can criticize to endlessly, and I have a lot of problems with. But it's also where I've seen young women discuss sex like I've never seen before or after. Like I'm a part of one of those private communities with the permission of the moderators, and it must have thousands, if not thousands, at least like hundreds of young women, all Hindi speaking. It's like anytime I go on Facebook, there are like 90 notifications. They're all from these women who are talking about, this was formed for women to network with each other in order to find job opportunities. So I thought it would be interesting for me to write a story, but then it's all about love and sex and caste and families and religion and men. And so it was fascinating to see. And I've also seen so much like political resistance coming out of TikTok and Facebook and YouTube that I feel like both of these things will go on together. We can blame Facebook as a company for like really messing things up, but these are also going to be platforms where people go on to find people that they want to
create
know.
To create resistance and to find pleasure, right? Which is very difficult for women offline, and is also difficult for women online because so few women in comparison to men, have access to online spaces. But yet, once you have that, you can make a lot out of it. But that really does bring me to something that I think has become increasingly clear to all of us. One, as all of you have implied or talked about in different ways, corporations control our experience of the internet to a degree that, to such a vast degree that sometimes, we can't grasp it. But the other thing that we've seen, of course, is that the internet is changing politically. You have big institutions, you have big governments, you have powerful old men who either don't know or don't care about the ways in which the internet kind of makes life livable for Indians, to try and impose their will on it. Anurag mentioned the WhatsApp outage, or rather the WhatsApp and Facebook outage of a few days ago, and it was very amusing to me. I saw a lot of people in the West say, "This is terrible. People in India live on WhatsApp. You're like, even an outage of a few hours is cutting off like their lives." And I had the maybe not very accurate thought that staying away from if all of India stayed away from WhatsApp for an evening, maybe that could actually save some lives at this stage. So when I said that, I thought that the internet was.
I think we need WhatsApp Navratra, like for 9 days, no WhatsApp kind of.
I think it would help a number of people just like survive. So I do think, as the world, becomes sort of increasingly comes under the thumb of authoritarians, of course, the internet is also going to undergo changes. And so that really restricts access to the internet. And Soumitra, you published in the Lancet just this week about, and this is something you've helped frame this idea for a lot of people online, I think, that mental health is, it's more helpful to think of mental health as a social justice issue than as sort of a personal individual problem for a vast number of people. So you are making a political point. And for a lot of people, particularly during the pandemic, the internet has been a resource for not enough people, but for the few people who are online, the internet has been a resource for how to think about mental health and how to begin to understand mental health. But increasingly, it feels like the people who need it most might just not have access to that, right?
Yes.
Would you like to talk a little bit about your Lancet study? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, before I get to that, I just wanted to pick up from where Anurag just left off. I think that is an important point that Anurag is making. The fact is that if you're a Dalit man or a woman, if you're bisexual, if you're LGBTQI community, if you're a woman, just a woman for that matter, the amount of abuse that you will see that is directed at anyone who is trying to express their opinions on social media is just unbelievable. And I have seen that. I've seen that happen. I've seen me say the same thing and not get. I do get abuse, but not at the level at which someone else might get. And I think the fact of the matter is that these corporations which run these platforms are aware of it and will not do anything about it. So, let's be very clear that the abuse that is faced by Dalits on social media is not by accident. It's not because, we can't do anything to stop it. It is intentional, and it is intentionally allowed to continue. That's the reality of it. The abuse of women, for example, is equally true. Corporations, and I'm accusing corporations that they are allowing this to continue because it is good for their bottom line. Hell with everybody's mental health, but it's good for our bottom line. And if they're not doing that, then they better come clean and show that they're not doing that, which none of them have done so. So, I think let's be very clear that the experience of the internet means very different things for different groups, and especially for marginalized groups. Okay. Coming back to the point about what we made in our Lancet article, which I wrote with a couple of Black colleagues, women from the UK and from the US, was that if you look at a lot of the research that is there, and this is not research which gets talked about, unfortunately, is that if you intervened and did some social interventions, then those had as much effect on people's mental health. And I come at it from a public health perspective. I'm not taking the individual perspective. Then those had as much effects as mental health treatments do. So, I mean, in the article, we talk about suicide. There's data from Brazil, for example, which shows that if you did conditional cash transfers, they gave out basically money to poor families on a regular basis. And what did the conditional cash transfer showed was that suicides among that group over a 15-year period, and this is a large group, they covered 100 million people in Brazil, which is a large group, okay, half of the population, and over 12 years. So you got huge amounts of data. So your findings are solid in a sense. It's not with 10 or 15 or 100 people. What you find is that suicide rates among these people who received cash transfers were down by 61%. Now, my point there and our point there was that there is no mental health intervention which reduces suicides by 61%. And here is one mental health intervention which does reduce suicides by 61%. There's this wonderful article in the Atlantic by which looked at cash transfers in a place like California. You think California is the richest place in the world, kind of a thing. And Stockton town in California did a cash transfer experiment where they randomly assigned people to get cash versus not, and then looked at people's mental health. And what you find is that there are huge mental health improvements among people who received cash transfers. And the mayor of Stockton said, put it quite well. He said, for some forms of anxiety and depression, cash is a better treatment than Prozac. I totally kind of get it, because that's what the evidence shows. There is recently data which shows that if you improve people's minimum wages, then the effect of that on depressive symptoms is as much as the effect of antidepressants. So the reality is that if we do not address these social issues, which are big social issues in the background, and just keep on harping about this notion of mental illness requires treatment, and let's improve mental illness treatment, then you're just missing the wood for the trees, really. It's band-aid, it's just band-aid. You're just telling people to get treated for things that are outside of their hands. Just in the way with the internet, what you see on social media is actually controlled by something which is way beyond what you can imagine. And so you don't even realize what is happening, and you think, oh, I'm getting upset because maybe I saw some upsetting kind of thing, without realizing that you're getting upset because somebody is actually controlling what you will see and wants you to get upset. And that you are not able to then decipher that. So these are bigger issues that we are not addressing. So if you're talking about mental health for young people, then we need to talk about jobs, we need to talk about employment, we need to talk about access to education, we need to talk about stopping abuse, we need to talk about preventing violence. All of these are issues which we need to do. Just to give you one statistic which I think is important. 1/3 of Indian women who die of suicide have a history of domestic violence. Okay, that's 1 out of 3 women who die of suicide. So, what do you think? What should we be doing? Not mental health helplines. We need to do something about the domestic violence that is happening. That's what will solve the problem. But there's a singular reluctance to do things that are required to the broader social structures. Because it challenges entrenched interest, it challenges privilege. And somehow we are not willing to really address that. And so, the World Mental Health Day has just become a nice day for platitudes.
Yes. I don't know if my connection is unstable or Soumitra's is, but that's a point that ties into something Snigdha said at the very start of this conversation, which was just about sheer economic distress devastating you, your sense of self, your identity, and obviously then everything you do, including what you do online. We are now at the 1 hour mark, which means that I can open this up to audience questions. I have more questions for for you, our panelists, but I think it would only be fair to also open this up. And then I'll see if I can include some of my own questions with these. I encourage our listeners to send in their questions, and I'll toss them over to our panelists. Anurag, there's a question for, first of all, an anonymous attendee has said, आज LSD conference में अनुराग माइनस वर्मा को सुनने का सौभाग्य प्राप्त हुआ, which yes, we're all very lucky, but also आपके podcast पे भी सुनने को मिलता है.
That line is my line from video diaries that I make. So yeah.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, there's
Isn't it vastly different being a video content creator and a podcast creator? I feel like the stress with
I can only exist in chaos. So there is a whole lot of chaos. Even I don't know what is going on sometimes. But that is how I operate. So yeah, that's it.
Seems like the best way to deal with the chaos around us. Yeah. Okay, question for you. As a content creator, have you tried any practice of self-care to go side by side with your engagement on social media? This is from Akshay. Akshay says, have you imagined an ethics of social media use so that all your time doesn't feel colonized by the attention reward economy?
I mean, I just follow few things that I follow on social media. I mean, I made them as a rule. First is that I don't respond to anything which is nasty or which is said in extremely negative way or something. Criticism is fine, I can respond to that, but something which is nasty or something which is personal, so I don't respond to that. So as they say, lafda is the word, so I don't get into that. Never I get into that, because it's useless to fight with someone on social media. We'll get into the loop and then मतलब आपका जो काम है, जो भी space है, उसी में divert होती रहेगी. So this one thing, I made a rule that I will never respond to anything which is nasty or which is bad. So that really helped me, because now my energies are more into that. And the second thing is that if you look at the algorithm, it is like this. I mean, I absolutely agree with that the algorithm is meant in a way that your mental health will deteriorate in a way, because I think shares of Facebook goes up when your mental health deteriorates, and individuals deteriorate. Their income is inversely proportional to your mental health. So I mean, the whole algorithm is in a way designed to make you extremely angry, to extremely provoke you to get into some fight, to make some nasty comment, to put some individual down. That algorithm is made because that's how you'll spend more time. So that is the basic design. If they start prioritizing mental health of an individual, then I think their social media will collapse. So expecting this app to care about your mental health is like expecting Modi to be secular or Adani to be socialist or something like that. So these are the core value of the app, which is not going to change. Now it's the duty of individual to use this app with I mean, be very, very aware when you are using app, or whenever you are putting something online, typing something, you should understand that it is not like aapne kuch bhi random bol diya and nothing will come out. It can impact your mental health, whatever. So you should be very careful about what you are putting online. And I think it's good to be little less reactive, be more kinder and empathetic about the mental health of another individual. So that approach is necessary, because most of the time I see that not many people write about empathy, but they present themselves as an empathetic individual, but they themselves don't have any special empathy or regard for mental health of another human being. So I think we should be a little humane on this app, so that I just try to follow these things, which sometimes work, sometimes don't. But yeah, I think that's how I look at it.
That's really good, and I think you've said something that will hopefully be helpful to a lot of people who do specifically who do this, who put their content out for others to listen to and react to and take to heart. I like that question so much that I want to expand it to our other panelists as well. But I'll come back to that, because there's another question for you. This is from Nishant, who is asking you specifically, I'm a Dalit bisexual man. The internet algorithm is pushing mostly cis gay men and even straight men content. So it's very difficult to find your identity and find it relatable. So Nishant, and he says there are Dalit LGBTQIA plus community creators whom Nishant does not personally find relatable. So his question is how to find a community virtually where this intersectionality is respected and is safe.
1 second. If you're talking about the algorithm, then I think I'm not a guru or something, but whatever I have learned from this whole social media thing, that first of all, whatever you're putting, whatever you're saying, you should personally enjoy writing it. Either if it's an interesting thing, if it's a social responsibility that you're thinking, then you should totally believe in that thing. So these two are very important. You shouldn't post something which you are not. So it should come from you within, and then whatever you're posting or creating content out of it, that whole activity would be very therapeutic for you. So that is the first thing. If you should really enjoy whatever you're saying and totally believe in that. Now the algorithm, how it will behave. One thing I can say that in this, you said that Dalit bisexual man, or even whenever you are talking about anything which is anti-caste, so algorithm bias is obviously there. But if you continuously create something, if you continuously do something, then you can game the algorithm. That's also there, and you should always look out for something interesting way to communicate yourself. So keep on looking for some interesting ways, somehow. Interesting ways to communicate, interesting internet vocabularies. You can vocabulary as in like how the storytelling is framed around on the internet. So you can also look at these things, and I think that might help in gaming the algorithm, which I would say. Yeah.
That's useful advice. Before I move on to the next audience question, I actually want to throw what Anurag's been talking about to both of you, Snigdha and Soumitra. What does self-care on the internet work for you and for like the communities and the people you know of and the spaces that you're in? And if yes, can you tell us a little about it? Snigdha?
Sure. I really like what Anurag said. It's about, we know that these are, spaces that are sort of essentially gain from bringing our mental health down. So how do you protect yourself and stay sane and use the platform? And, in a lot of cases that I follow, like even gain influence and popularity and make money, and all of these things have to be, and I really hope that more people hear what you have to say. I think personally, I guess each one of us has to find ways to ensure our sanity. And what I do, one of the things that you said in your email was the idea of what you post being taken in ways that are completely, wild. So, the reactions to something that you posted could be so bizarre sometimes, which happens to me a lot of times. Like I posted on Instagram a photo of my thali, it was just chawal dal or something, and then someone commented saying you should go to Pakistan, and I just couldn't figure out what was going on, and then realized that this guy follows me on Twitter, where I don't even post political opinion, but I wrote something that may have pissed him off about the political views expressed by other people in the article. So he was commenting on my chawal dal photo that you should go to Pakistan.
Not that dal chawal would make you popular anywhere, including Pakistan, but I like dal chawal, but yes.
I know, but just chawal dal. So one of the ways that, one of the learnings for me is to just, deal with Twitter differently and Instagram differently and Facebook differently. So, on Instagram, where I mostly post personal stuff, I do not allow people to comment on my post unless I follow them. I like what Anurag said about not commenting, not responding to negative comments, but I don't even have the energy to see the negative comments, such as go to Pakistan. So you can't comment on my posts if I don't follow you. For the others, people I know, I've mentioned this earlier, especially for younger women, they have started to really privatize their circles. So I know that a lot of like people that I follow just post to just their close friends or make these tight Facebook groups that you can't get into unless you're really known to the people. So yeah, I guess I would really recommend that if you're a young person listening to us.
Yeah, seems like a now the most obvious way to protect yourself in like an increasingly surveilled arena, right? Particularly if you're a woman or you come from a minoritized identity. So that actually really makes sense to me, which is that these big social media corporations like blew the internet up and suddenly made everything public and everything but oversharing. And now kind of we're seeing a reaction to that. So Soumitra, can I ask you about your thoughts about practicing self-care when you put stuff out on the internet? Are there things you practice yourself? Is there advice that you give to others about this?
I only use Twitter, as you probably know. I don't post anything on Facebook or on Instagram because I don't have those accounts at all. So what do I do? I mean, I've got very simple rules that I use. I don't get particularly first of all, I don't get into battles unless they are interesting academic intellectual discussions. I don't get into battles with people. It's a free country and everyone's entitled to their poison. They can like what they like, and I don't have to bother about it. So that I do. If I come across anyone who's being personally nasty or violent or abusive, then there's nothing like blocking people off. You just block people off, and so they're not there. I don't particularly like the idea what Snigdha said about people having their own individual groups. The problem is that what it does is then you're in your own echo chamber, and the whole idea of being on the internet was to explore, meet new people, come across new ideas, and all of that is lost if the only thing you're going to do is then keep your own little private room where you're only talking to your own existing friends. So I wouldn't recommend that. And the other thing that you have to realize when you're on the internet is, I've started taking this attitude, which is that the hunted have to become hunters. You know, you have to hunt the trolls and hunt them down and block them off. You should stop being the hunted. You become the hunter. So what I will do once in a while, every Sunday or so, if I have the time, post an intentionally provocative tweet, which I know will bring out a lot of trolls, because then I can just completely block them all out at one go. So you have to hunt them out too. I know this sounds like silly, but it becomes a game, and you stop being frightened, and you stop feeling that you are being hunted. You turn the tables around, and so I think it's very important, and you don't get into battles with people. It's pointless getting into battles with people who are trolling you. I mean, why would you want to do that? And I mean, people complain, and the third thing that I always do, or which is useful, is use sarcasm and humor to make fun of them. I mean, if there's one thing that the trolls can't take, is sarcasm and humor, because they're not. You see, the whole idea is to irritate you and get at you. And if you're not getting to get upset, then that irritates them even more than it is they set out to irritate you. You laugh at it, that irritates them, and so now you turn the tables. So I know this all sounds like very easy to do. It's not easy to do, but it is something that you need to do if you're doing self-care on the internet. Is stop feeling that you are being hunted.
I have to say, for me personally, I felt that the mute button, which doesn't allow people to know that you've seen what they've said to you.
I use the mute button a lot because it's just so lovely, isn't it, to mute them off and they're shouting away in the ether, and it doesn't even appear on your on your timeline. So I don't usually block people. I block people who are there are some people I will block, but I use the mute a lot because there's nothing like the mute button. It's the best thing ever invented.
Yeah, I've blocked a few TV channels whose ethics I disagree with. which I will not name here, but everyone else I kind of tend to mute. The one comment I'm now going to use moderator's privilege and say two things. The one thing I will say is that the flip side, I think both you and Snigdha make compelling points about the uses of like kind of a closed private space. I think I think the cool thing about social media is still getting to discover new things. I would not have heard Anurag's podcast if I hadn't come across a tweet about one of his episodes, for example. But given the dangers of the filter bubbles that social media already creates for us, I can see why sensitive subjects or people who feel like they are more, liable to be abused than others because of, for example, their gender or caste or religion, might want to create safe spaces in which they can talk to trusted people or stay in touch with them without getting harassed. The second thing I'll say is that I actually find anonymity really helpful. So one of the things that saved me during the pandemic was I just stayed off social media for a few months, but I didn't want to miss out on, the things that I really like. So I made an anonymous account so that I could follow just accounts that talked about painting or cinema or, the TV shows that I liked, and kind of stayed connected to those. And weirdly enough, I know that creating that kind of bubble for yourself is not always easy, but that really helped me. I know things have been different
it does, right? I have anonymous accounts everywhere. But I also wanted to clarify that these private groups that I'm talking about are not necessarily small or uniform or homogeneous. These are like this particular Facebook group that I was talking about has young people from everywhere, every Hindi-speaking background. So it's not that they want to keep it small. It's a giant group. Like I said, every time I open Facebook, I have 98 notifications. It's just that because they're talking about things that are very personal, including love, sex, boys, family, etc. It's just they can figure out if you're going to be the kind of person who will not get this, and they won't allow you to join the group. That's all.
We have a question from.
I would just. No, I was just going to add to what Snigdha said. I think there is no right answer to these things. Okay, it actually depends on what you're using it for. What are you using the social media for? If you're using the social media in the way Snigdha said about you want to have a conversation with like-minded people about a like-minded topic, and then having a closed group obviously makes sense. If you're using social media because you want to make a point and you want the world to know of that point, then you actually want it to be very public and you don't want it to be a closed thing. So I think it all depends on what you're using it for. So it's not like, one way is the right way and the other way is the wrong way. You might use a combination of both. For some things you want to keep a very private, restricted group with whom you share things, and other things which you want to share with the world. And then people should really think about it when they're deciding which goes where.
Fragment your internet experience to look after yourself, among other things. Sushmita S has a question for all of you. Any advice on what influencers, okay, maybe this is specific to Anurag, or at least Anurag should go first. Any advice on what influencers can do to build communities and audiences that are positive, beneficial, and constructive? Apart from, of course, being liberal with the block button. Because Sushmita says internet communities can be great learning spaces, result in cool professional opportunities, break barriers between people who would never connect otherwise, which is all true. And she would hate for people to have to choose between that and self-preservation. So advice for people building communities online. Anurag, would you like to go first?
Can I come back in 2 minutes?
Yes, of course. Yeah. I'll go around. Snigdha, any advice on community building or building audiences in positive ways?
I don't follow any influencer on Instagram, unfortunately. But only exception would be Anurag, I guess. So I really think we should allow him to return
Yeah,
Not the right person to answer
tell
this,
us
but I
what
think,
you
Supriya,
think.
you should take this.
I mean, one of the things I think we do struggle against online is that while good work, you can build communities and build audiences of people who are interested in your work. The fight is always how do you reach them organically, and I think that is something that has become increasingly difficult for people, which is basically you get to build like a big community, a big vibrant community if you have money, and that is, and I understand that that can be a challenge for individuals or even for small companies trying to do good work. I think going back to something Anurag said earlier, you you keep innovating on ways to tell your story, um, and that helps you. Like the algorithm is not like a giant windowless institution. It changes as you change, and so you can find niches. And I think maybe one thing to do sort of mentally is to set your own goals independent of what you see, others, of what you see others achieve, because scale means completely different things to completely different people on the internet. So that would be something I advise. Yes, sorry, Anurag, was that your voice?
Yeah, I mean, the whole, like Snigdha said, I don't follow influencer. If I follow someone because of the courtesy, because they follow me, so I don't consume their content, maybe put them on mute or something like that, because there is no, the whole internet is a very different space. If you really need to understand the internet aesthetic, then you have to understand that whatever is happening on internet, अगर मतलब वो एक homogenized एक उस तरह का space नहीं कि एक circle में exist कर रहा है या फिर एक group बना हुआ है. It's not like that. Internet is a scattered and a very messy space. So if you are going there to consume something, build something or whatever, you have to first develop something to recognize what is there on internet, and whatever you find, will find in a very scattered way, in a very messy way. That's the internet aesthetic. This aesthetic of one influencer will tell you what to do, or some some influencer who have some godlike aura around them and they pretend that they know something, is not even an internet aesthetic, if I would say. So that is not possible. So now whatever you have to do and how to use internet in a more of a therapeutic way, building communities, that you have to personally navigate through this whole space. Like, for example, I'll tell you, like, when I came, I think I became active on internet 1.5 years back. So that time, that was the first time when I saw so many people talking about caste, so many people discussing caste openly. It was extremely surprising for me, because earlier I used to live, like, I live in a small town. I live in Jaipur, and previously lived in Sikar and other small towns of Rajasthan. So we used to think that we have to hide this whole thing, that the whole experience of the caste. So my growing up years was all about that the caste is a kind of a personal sadness, and you don't have to tell anyone about that. So you have to deal with that somehow. So that was the approach, because there was no community, there was no person with whom you can share the experience. Even if you're you get some casteist abuse in the school, then you can't share it with your parents or to someone, to anyone, because you are also scared about there are a lot many things which goes on in your mind. So there is no sense of community there. So on internet, when I saw so many people making memes about memes, as in like the anti-caste memes about it, talking about it, so that was the first time I discovered that okay, there are a lot many people who are talking about it, who are discussing caste openly. So that gave me a strength. So I became part of that community in a way. So now whatever I'm producing through that, because that gave me some kind of strength. Now I'm producing a podcast, maybe some content which has themes of anti-caste. So that becomes part of a tradition of anti-caste. So I also become a link in that whole structure. So what you have to do is also that you have to be a little humble in that. Don't take yourself more seriously. You are only a link in that whole structure, or they say whole river. You are just a small part of that. You become part of that. And now what you can do as an individual, what you can do if you are come from a privileged kind of a background, privilege as in like you can talk or speak in English or in any vocabulary that you can present your thought, then your responsibility become that you should also produce something that also help a future generation of people. So that can be an important approach, that whatever you are producing, don't do it for immediate like or share. Maybe you might not get enough engagement in whatever you are doing, but have little vision for the future, and think of it as a social responsibility. And the second thing is that being on internet is not all about social responsibility. Especially if you're from a Bahujan background, you should also learn how to have fun. So it's not a responsibility to like दुनिया को बदलने की responsibility आपकी नहीं है, इतना बोझ आपको लेने की जरूरत नहीं है. But हाँ, आपको बोलना चाहिए जो भी आपका experience है, that would be therapeutic. But you should also do fun. You should also express yourself, put nonsensical thing, absurd thing, whatever you want to do, you should also do. So you should be completely free in whatever you want to say. So that is one thing. And the second thing is internet ka, I think I got some question where they were asking about internet is a bad space or something. I absolutely love internet. मैं internet पे जितना happy हूँ इस वक्त, I mean, I'm more happy than how I was a few years back. So I absolutely love. All I'm saying that whenever you're using internet, don't think of it as ki you can, do anything on internet or it's a fun space. It's a bit it's an extremely complicated space. And if you're using the internet, just be careful that it can also be a dangerous space. It can be a happy space as well, but also can be a dangerous space. Just have that awareness when you're using the internet. That's all I wanted to say. Yeah.
I find what you say and something Soumitra said earlier, sort of a really helpful way for me to think about this, the internet becoming potentially increasingly dangerous. Well, if it is, then you just have to confront it with a new kind of courage and a new kind of sensibility.
Because offline world is also extremely dangerous, but we then make some rule to protect ourselves in some way. So similarly, you have to make some rule to protect yourself in the digital world. Yeah,
absolutely. We have just a few minutes. I'll go.
Can I come back to this question of positivity? That question that how can influences? I think one of the points that Snigdha or Anurag didn't make, and I think it's important to make, is that there is enough of toxic positivity around also. And what do we mean by positivity? Does positivity mean that we do not raise difficult questions? Does positivity mean that we do not ask difficult questions? We do not discuss difficult issues because it makes people uncomfortable? If that's what is meant by positivity, then I'm sorry, that's not positivity. And that's not beneficial to anybody. Raising difficult questions, asking difficult, questioning people about difficult issues, making people uncomfortable, that's not necessarily being negative. Okay. So I think we need to understand, we need to be very clear what we mean by positivity, because that's a very important distinction. Otherwise, if positivity just means, everyone posts happy, wonderful pictures of how everyone's having a wonderful time, then that's not positivity at all, according to me.
No, that's the scariest part of the internet, the part where everyone is having a good time all the time. We are just a minute away from time out, and I'm afraid we won't be able to get to our other anonymous questions. I apologize for that. We have thank you from a bunch of people for the conversation. Thank you back to our listeners. And Anurag, Snigdha, Soumitra, thank you so much for being a part of this panel. Thank you very much, LSD and the wonderful team there that organized this beautifully and painlessly for all of us. And to our ISL interpreter, it's been great to have you as part of our conversation. Thank you. See you guys. Over to you, Team LSD.